The encounter at the gas station. The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of amber and crimson. Michael Grayson, a soft-spoken yet confident black man in his mid-30s, pulled into a quiet gas station off the highway. His day had been long, filled with repairing engines and replacing brake pads at the auto shop where he worked. Though tired, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Fixing things was his calling, his passion. As Michael stepped off his sleek, black motorcycle, he noticed an elderly man struggling to change a flat tire on his old sedan. The man looked defeated, sweat dripping down his face, his shirt sticking to his back. Michael approached with a calm smile. "Hey there, sir. Need a hand?" The elderly man looked up, startled at first, but then relieved. "Oh, thank you, young man. I've been out here for almost an hour, and my hands, they're not as steady as they used to be." Michael didn't hesitate. He fetched his toolkit from his bike and knelt beside the car. His practiced hands worked quickly and efficiently. The man watched in awe, gratitude evident in his watery eyes. "Bless you, son. People like you are rare these days," the man said, his voice trembling slightly. Michael simply nodded, brushing off the praise. "Just doing what I'd hoped someone would do for me or my family." Once the tire was replaced, the man reached into his wallet, but Michael waved him off. "No need, sir. Just pay it forward." The elderly man drove off, honking his horn in thanks, and Michael turned back to his bike, ready to head home. The warm glow of helping someone made his exhaustion a little easier to bear. But peace didn't last long. The sound of roaring engines broke the serenity. 3 motorcycles, loud and aggressive, sped into the gas station, their riders clad in black leather jackets adorned with menacing insignias. The men dismounted, their boots hitting the ground with authority, and immediately caught sight of Michael. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a smug smirk, pointed at Michael. "What's this? A boy on a fancy bike, thinking he belongs here." Michael straightened, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. "Just stopping for gas," he replied, his voice steady but calm. The leader laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "This ain't your kind of place. Maybe you ought to keep riding before you get hurt." The other 2 bikers flanked their leader. One was a burly man with a long, scraggly beard, his knuckles scarred from countless fights. The other was wiry, almost jittery, with a chain dangling from his belt like a weapon waiting to be used. Michael remained silent, his body language unthreatening but firm. He knew better than to rise to their bait, but his silence seemed to agitate them more. "Lost your tongue, huh?" the wiry biker sneered, swinging the chain in small circles. "Or are you just too scared to talk?" Michael exhaled slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Look, I don't want trouble. I'm just here to fill up and go." "Trouble?" The leader stepped closer, his tone mocking. "No trouble at all. We just want to know how a guy like you got a bike like that. Doesn't seem like it belongs to you." Michael's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He had been in situations like this before, where his skin color was the only thing people saw, where respect was replaced by disdain. He'd learned to stay calm, to avoid giving them the reaction they craved. "Let's see what you're hiding," the burly biker said, stepping toward Michael's bike and kicking the side mirror. It snapped off and clattered to the ground. Michael's eyes flicked to the broken mirror, a flash of anger crossing his face, but he didn't move. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The bikers laughed louder. "Oh, look at this," the wiry one said, calling for backup. "Go ahead, call whoever you want. Ain't nobody coming for you." Ignoring them, Michael calmly tapped his phone screen and raised it to his ear. "This is Michael Grayson," he said evenly, his voice carrying over the bikers' cheers. "I'm at the Eastwood gas station. Could use some assistance." He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket, his movements deliberate and controlled. The bikers stared at him, their confidence faltering for just a moment. "Who'd you call, boy?" the leader demanded, his tone sharper now. You think a little phone call's gonna save you? Michael met the man's gaze, his expression unreadable. We'll see, he said quietly. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, but quickly shook off their hesitation. The leader gestured to the wiry one, who took the chain from his belt and stepped forward, swinging it menacingly. Let's see how tough you really are, the wiry biker said, a sinister grin spreading across his face. Michael didn't move. His calmness, his lack of fear, only seemed to enrage them further. But then, faintly at first, a sound cut through the tense silence, the distant wail of sirens. The bikers froze, their heads snapping toward the highway. Michael stayed rooted in place, his expression as calm as ever. I think my assistance has arrived, he said. The leader's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. What the hell did you do? Michael didn't answer. He simply folded his arms across his chest and waited. The sirens grew louder, and within moments, 2 police cruisers and a convoy of motorcycles pulled into the gas station. The bikers' bravado crumbled as the flashing lights reflected off their faces, exposing their fear. They weren't just outnumbered, they were outmatched. The storm begins. The air crackled with tension as the convoy of vehicles approached the gas station. First came the police cruisers, their blue and red lights painting the darkening sky. Following close behind were 3 motorcycles, their riders clad in polished black leather and bearing the emblem of a silver eagle, a mark that even seasoned bikers knew to respect. These weren't just any bikers. They were members of the Iron Eagles, a powerful and disciplined motorcycle club known for their unwavering sense of justice. Michael remained standing by his motorcycle, calm and unshaken, as the scene unfolded. The 3 bikers who had been mocking him moments before now stood rigid, their confidence visibly eroded. The leader, a burly man with a shaved head and a deep scowl, exchanged uneasy glances with his crew. Who are these guys? The wiry one whispered, his voice barely audible. Michael didn't reply. He didn't need to. His stillness and the subtle curve of his lips said everything. He had been through enough situations like this to know that patience was often the most powerful weapon. The first police cruiser came to a stop, and out stepped a tall, imposing officer with sharp features and a calm yet commanding presence. His uniform bore the insignia of a captain, and his movements were deliberate, exuding authority. His name tag read Captain Marcus Bellamy. Bellamy walked straight toward Michael, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice steady but laced with familiarity. "Are you all right?" Michael nodded. "I'm fine, Captain. Just had a little disagreement with these gentlemen." Bellamy's sharp eyes swept over the 3 bikers. "Is that so?" he said, his tone turning cold as he addressed the men. "Would any of you care to explain what's going on here?" The leader of the bikers, trying to regain some semblance of authority, stepped forward. "It's nothing, officer. Just a misunderstanding. We were just talking." Bellamy tilted his head, scrutinizing the man with a gaze that could pierce steel. "Talking? Huh. Is that why there's a motorcycle with a damaged side mirror? Talking doesn't usually involve property damage." The wiry biker shifted uncomfortably, his hand instinctively brushing against the chain hanging from his belt. Bellamy noticed the movement and narrowed his eyes. "I'd think very carefully about what you say next," Bellamy said, his voice now dangerously low. "Lying to an officer can get you in a lot more trouble than you're already in." Before the bikers could respond, the 3 motorcycles from the convoy rolled in behind the police cruisers. The riders dismounted in unison, their boots hitting the ground with precision. They'd moved with the quiet confidence of men who had nothing to prove. Their jackets bore the Iron Eagle's emblem, but their demeanor spoke volumes. These were men who commanded respect. The leader of the Iron Eagles, a towering man with a salt and pepper beard and piercing gray eyes, walked toward Michael. His name was Ethan Grayson, Michael's older brother and the national president of the Iron Eagles. Though they looked different, Ethan's rugged, commanding presence a sharp contrast to Michael's quiet strength. The bond between them was undeniable. "Sorry for the delay, little brother," Ethan said, his voice a deep rumble. "Traffic was worse than I expected." Michael shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "You're right on time." The biker's leader, realizing who he was dealing with, took a step back. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated. "Wait a minute," he stammered, his voice trembling. You're with them." Michael finally broke his silence, his tone measured but firm. "That's right. I'm not just with them. I'm the regional vice president of the Iron Eagles, and you just made the mistake of thinking you could intimidate me." The weight of Michael's words hung heavy in the air. The bikers looked at each other, their faces pale. They had assumed Michael was an easy target, someone they could bully without consequence. They hadn't anticipated that he had allies with both the police and one of the most respected motorcycle clubs in the region. Ethan turned to the bikers, his gray eyes cold and unforgiving. "You must be new around here," he said, his voice like a growl. "Because anyone who's been in this area long enough knows not to mess with an Iron Eagle, especially not my brother." The bikers tried to backpedal. The wiry one, still clutching his chain, stammered, "Look, we didn't mean anything by it. We were just messing around." Bellamy raised a hand to silence him. "Messing around? You call destroying property and making threats messing around? Because where I'm standing, that sounds more like harassment and intimidation." The other officers had stepped out of their cruisers by now, their hands resting on their belts. The tension was palpable, and the bikers knew they were out of options. Michael finally stepped forward, his expression calm but unyielding. "You have two choices," he said, addressing the leader directly. "You can apologize, right here, in front of everyone, for your actions, or you can let Captain Bellamy and his officers handle this the official way. Either way, you're not walking out of here without consequences." The bikers hesitated, their egos clashing with their survival instincts. The crowd that had gathered around the gas station was growing, their phones out, recording every second. The leader looked around, realizing that the humiliation would be documented and shared for the world to see. Finally, he swallowed his pride. "We're sorry," he muttered, barely audible. Michael tilted his head. "I didn't catch that. Speak up." The leader gritted his teeth. "We're sorry," he said louder. "It was a mistake." Michael nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now, pick up the mirror you broke and hand it to me." The leader hesitated but complied, bending down to retrieve the broken mirror and handing it to Michael. The act, though small, was a clear symbol of the shift in power. As the bikers stood awkwardly, Bellamy stepped forward. "Apologies aside, there are still consequences for your actions. You'll be detained for property damage and disturbing the peace. Officers, cuff them." The bikers protested, but it was futile. The officers moved swiftly, placing handcuffs on the men and leading them to the cruisers. The crowd watched in silence, the atmosphere charged with a mix of awe and vindication. Ethan clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. "You handled that well." Michael shrugged. "Sometimes, all it takes is staying calm and making the right call." The crowd began to disperse, but the story wasn't over. Unbeknownst to the bikers, the videos of their humiliation were already being uploaded online, sparking conversations about justice, prejudice, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. The iron bond. The flashing police lights faded into the distance as the cruisers carried the bikers away. The crowd had thinned, though a few stragglers remained, whispering among themselves and scrolling through their phones, watching the videos they had just recorded. Michael stood quietly by his motorcycle, carefully inspecting the damage to the mirror. The broken piece lay in his hand, a small but poignant reminder of the encounter. Ethan, his older brother and the president of the Iron Eagles, stepped closer. His towering figure cast a shadow over Michael, but there was nothing intimidating in his posture. Instead, his gray eyes softened as he observed Michael's calm demeanor. "You're too forgiving," Ethan said, his gravelly voice carrying a note of concern. You could have let Bellamy throw the book at them from the start. Michael chuckled softly, still examining the broken mirror. And what would that accomplish? They'd be in jail for a night, maybe two. Then they'd be back out, angrier and none the wiser. Sometimes, humiliation is a better teacher than punishment. Ethan folded his arms, his leather jacket creaking slightly. You always were the diplomat, he said with a hint of admiration. But don't mistake kindness for weakness. Not everyone deserves a second chance. Michael looked up, his gaze steady. I know, but I also know that not every fight needs to end with fists or jail time. Some people need to see they're wrong, not just be told. Ethan nodded slowly, acknowledging the wisdom in his brother's words. You've got a point. But I'll tell you this, if they come back looking for trouble, they'll have to go through all of us. Michael smiled faintly. I know, Ethan. I've never doubted that. As the two brothers talked, the remaining Iron Eagles gathered around, their presence commanding respect. They were a diverse group, men and women of different ages and backgrounds, united by their loyalty to the club and to each other. Among them was Rosa, a fiery woman with short-cropped hair and a sharp wit, and Jared, a former Marine whose quiet strength made him the club's unofficial enforcer. Rosa leaned against her bike, chewing gum and watching Michael with curiosity. You've got nerves of steel, Grayson, she said, tossing the gum wrapper into a nearby trash can. Most people would have lost it back there. Michael shrugged. It's not about nerves. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to let the situation speak for itself. Jared nodded in agreement. That's why you're vice president. You've got a way of handling things that most people can't. The camaraderie among the group was palpable, but the mood shifted when Captain Bellamy returned. He had stayed behind to finish speaking with the gas station owner and ensure everything was squared away. His stern expression softened as he approached Michael and Ethan. Everything's handled for now, Bellamy said, his authoritative tone still present, but less rigid. The gas station owner won't press charges, but the bikers are being booked for property damage and harassment. Thanks, Captain, Ethan said, extending a hand. Bellamy shook it firmly, then turned to Michael. You've got quite a support system, he said, gesturing toward the Iron Eagles. But I have to ask, why didn't you call me sooner? You've got my number. Michael gave a small smile. Because I knew you'd come when it mattered. I just needed to make sure the situation didn't get out of hand before you arrived. Bellamy sighed, shaking his head with a hint of exasperation. You're too calculated for your own good, Michael. But I'll give you credit. You handled this better than most would have. Ethan clapped a hand on Michael's shoulder. That's our way. Stay calm, stay focused, and handle things smartly. But let's not forget, he had backup. The mention of backup wasn't just about the Iron Eagles. It was about the unspoken trust that bound them all together. Family, friends, and allies. Whether it was the police or the club, Michael knew he wasn't alone. And that made all the difference. As the group prepared to leave, Michael turned his attention back to his motorcycle. He carefully reattached the broken mirror, using a spare part from his toolkit. Ethan watched him work, a mix of pride and nostalgia in his expression. You know, Ethan said, it wasn't that long ago. You were the one following me around, trying to figure out how to fix bikes. Michael chuckled, tightening the screws on the mirror. And you weren't exactly patient about teaching me. Ethan smirked. Tough love, little brother. But it worked, didn't it? It did, Michael admitted. And now here we are. The moment of levity was brief but meaningful. The bond between the Grayson brothers ran deep, forged through years of shared struggles and victories. It was a bond that extended to the Iron Eagles, making them more than just a motorcycle club. They were a family. As the Iron Eagles mounted their bikes, preparing to ride out together, Ethan glanced at Michael. You leading the way. Michael shook his head. Not tonight. I've got a few things to take care of. Ethan didn't press further. He knew his brother well enough to respect his need for space. All right, just call if you need anything. Michael nodded. "I will." With a roar of engines, the Iron Eagles rolled out, their presence as commanding in departure as it had been in arrival. Michael watched them go, his heart heavy with gratitude. They had his back, always. But as the sound of their bikes faded into the distance, Michael's mind turned to the videos circulating online. The encounter at the gas station was already going viral, and while most of the comments were supportive, he knew there would be backlash too. Prejudice and ignorance didn't disappear overnight. Michael mounted his motorcycle and started the engine, the hum of the machine steady beneath him. As he pulled onto the highway, his thoughts were focused not on what had happened, but on what was to come. There was still work to be done, conversations to have, lessons to teach, and bridges to build. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. Echoes of the viral storm. Michael's phone buzzed incessantly as he rode down the highway, the cool night air rushing past him. Each vibration was a reminder that the events at the gas station had exploded into something much larger. He had anticipated attention, but not at this scale. By the time he reached home, a modest but cozy bungalow at the edge of the city, the notifications had piled up into the hundreds. He parked his motorcycle in the driveway, removed his helmet, and exhaled deeply. The quiet of his neighborhood was a stark contrast to the storm brewing online. Michael wasn't a man who sought the spotlight, but tonight it seemed the spotlight had found him. Inside, he tossed his keys onto the counter and sank into the couch, finally opening his phone. The first thing he saw was a video clip of the confrontation, taken from one of the bystanders at the gas station. It had already amassed thousands of views and countless comments. Comment section highlights. That guy handled those bikers like a boss. Calm, collected, and then bam. Backup arrived like the cavalry. Respect to Michael and the Iron Eagles. This is how you deal with bullies without lowering yourself to their level. Can't believe people still act like this in 2024. Those bikers got what they deserved. There were, of course, dissenting voices as well. This is staged. No way someone like him actually has those connections. Typical. Turn it into a race thing when it's probably just a misunderstanding. Michael scrolled through the comments, his emotions a mixture of pride and frustration. He appreciated the support, but the ignorance and prejudice that still seeped through the cracks reminded him why moments like this mattered. He set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, the events of the day replayed in his mind. The bikers' sneers, their arrogance, the way their demeanor shifted the moment help arrived. It was a stark illustration of how people underestimated others based on shallow assumptions. The ringing of his phone broke his thoughts. The name on the screen made him smile. Ethan. You see the circus online yet? Ethan's deep voice rumbled through the line. I have, Michael replied. It's blowing up faster than I expected. Ethan chuckled. You've always had a way of making waves without trying. People respect what you did back there. Not everyone, Michael said, his voice tinged with weariness. Not everyone matters, Ethan countered. The ones who see the truth, that's who we do this for. Don't lose sight of that. Michael nodded, even though Ethan couldn't see him. I know. It's bigger than I expected. Feels like more than just my story now. It is, Ethan said firmly. But you've got a platform now. Use it wisely. If anyone can turn this into something meaningful, it's you. The call ended shortly after, leaving Michael with a sense of resolve. Ethan was right. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing against prejudice, about showing strength through calm and calculated action, and about proving that kindness and composure were far more powerful than aggression. The unexpected visitor. The next morning, Michael was in his garage, tinkering with his motorcycle. The early light spilled through the open door, illuminating the tools and spare parts neatly organized on shelves. The rhythmic sound of a wrench turning echoed through the space, grounding him in the familiar routine. A knock at the garage door caught his attention. He turned to see a young man standing there, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Michael recognized him immediately. It was the wiry biker from the gas station, the one who had swung the chain. Michael's expression hardened for a moment before he forced himself to remain neutral. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The young man looked down, unable to meet Michael's gaze. I came to apologize," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For what we did. For what I did." Michael folded his arms, leaning against the workbench. "Apologies a start. But what made you change your mind?" The biker hesitated before answering. "That video," he admitted. "It's everywhere now. People keep telling me what a fool I was, how wrong we were. And they're right. I've been thinking about it all night. And I don't know. I guess I just needed to see myself through someone else's eyes." Michael studied the young man for a moment. There was no defiance in his posture, no trace of the arrogance he had displayed at the gas station. Instead, there was vulnerability, a crack in the hardened exterior that had likely been built over years of bad influences and worse decisions. "What's your name?" Michael asked finally. "Trevor," the young man said. "Well, Trevor, I appreciate you coming here," Michael said, his tone softening slightly. "But an apology isn't enough. What are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again?" Trevor looked up, surprised by the question. I don't know. I want to change, but I don't even know where to start." Michael nodded slowly. "Change isn't easy, but it's possible. It starts with the people you surround yourself with. If you keep running with people like those guys from the gas station, you're never going to break free." Trevor nodded, looking thoughtful. "You're right. I've been hanging with the wrong crowd for too long." Michael picked up a wrench and turned it over in his hands, then looked at Trevor again. "If you're serious about changing, I can help. But it's going to take work. Are you ready for that?" Trevor's eyes widened. "You'd help me? After what I did?" Michael shrugged. "Everyone deserves a chance to prove they can be better. The question is, will you take it?" Trevor nodded fervently. "I will. I promise." A new beginning. As Trevor left the garage later that day, there was a new sense of hope in his stride. Michael watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He didn't know if Trevor would follow through on his promises, but giving him the chance felt like the right thing to do. The day wore on, and as Michael returned to his work, he couldn't help but think about how one moment, one act of kindness or calm resolve, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he couldn't predict. The events at the gas station had started as a confrontation, but they had turned into something much larger, a chance to change minds, to challenge prejudices, and to remind people that strength came in many forms. Michael's phone buzzed again. Another notification, another comment, another reminder that the world was watching. He took a deep breath and set the phone aside. There was work to do, and he was ready for whatever came next. The ripple effect. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael had already received dozens of messages and calls. Friends, family, and even strangers had reached out to share their thoughts about the video, their gratitude, and their anger over the injustice he faced. The events at the gas station had sparked a tidal wave of conversations that stretched far beyond his local community. Sitting on his porch with a steaming cup of coffee, Michael scrolled through his inbox. Among the many messages, one caught his attention. It was from an unfamiliar email address, the subject line reading, "A chance to collaborate." Intrigued, he opened it. Email from Amanda J. Carter, Director of Unity Works. "Dear Mr. Grayson, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Amanda Carter, and I am the Director of Unity Works, a non-profit organization dedicated to promoting racial equity and community building through dialogue and action. I recently came across the viral video of your encounter at the gas station, and I was deeply moved by your calm and composed approach in such a hostile situation. We believe your story has the power to inspire real change. I would love to discuss the possibility of working together to create workshops or events where you can share your experience and teach others about conflict resolution and the strength of staying composed under pressure. If you're interested, please let me know. I believe we could do something truly impactful together. Looking forward to hearing from you. Best regards, Amanda J. Carter. Michael leaned back in his chair, the email making him pause. He had always considered himself a quiet force, someone who preferred action over words. But Amanda's email suggested something different, that his voice and story could be a catalyst for change, a way to reach people far beyond his immediate circle. His thoughts were interrupted by another vibration, this time a text message from Trevor, the wiry biker who had come to his garage earlier that day. Text from Trevor. Hey, Mr. Grayson. I just wanted to thank you again for giving me a chance. I've been thinking about what you said all day, and I want to make things right. I started looking for a job, something that'll keep me out of trouble. Any advice? Michael smiled faintly. Trevor's message was a small victory, a sign that even the most unlikely people could change when given the opportunity. He quickly typed out a reply, offering advice and promising to help connect Trevor with a few people in the community who might be able to assist. As he hit send, his mind returned to Amanda's email. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he sat with the idea, considering what it would mean to step into such a public role. Could he handle the responsibility? Could he turn a moment of personal adversity into a movement that might inspire others? The meeting of minds. The next morning, Michael called Amanda. Her voice was warm and enthusiastic as she outlined her vision. A series of workshops where Michael could share his experience, teach conflict resolution techniques, and help foster understanding in communities grappling with division. I understand this is a lot to take in, Amanda said, her tone measured. But your story has already reached so many people. Imagine what could happen if you shared it intentionally, with the goal of making an impact. Michael listened carefully, asking questions and considering her points. By the end of the call, he wasn't entirely convinced, but he agreed to meet her in person to explore the idea further. A week later, they met at a community center in the city. Amanda was a tall, confident woman in her early 40s, with a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She greeted Michael warmly, her handshake firm. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading him into a small conference room where a few other team members were waiting. They spent the next 2 hours brainstorming, discussing the challenges of addressing systemic prejudice and the opportunities that came with sharing personal stories. "We don't want to just highlight the problem," Amanda explained. "We want to equip people with tools to create solutions. That's where you come in. You've lived this. You've shown that calm and courage can diffuse even the most hostile situations." Michael leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he considered her words. "I'm not a public speaker," he said honestly. "I'm just a guy who fixes bikes and tries to do the right thing." Amanda smiled. "And that's exactly why you're the right person for this. People don't need perfection, they need authenticity. They need to see that someone like them can stand up and make a difference." The first step. The following month, Michael found himself standing in front of a small crowd at a local library. It was his first time speaking publicly about the gas station incident, and despite his initial nerves, the audience's attentiveness gave him confidence. He began by describing what had happened that day, the biker's taunts, his decision to stay calm, and the moment when help arrived. He spoke about the importance of choosing composure over anger, of knowing when to call for help, and of believing in the power of community. "It's easy to respond to aggression with aggression," he said, his voice steady. "But the harder choice, the better choice, is to respond with strength and calm. That's what changes minds. That's what turns enemies into allies." The audience was captivated. They asked thoughtful questions, shared their own experiences, and thanked Michael for his courage. By the end of the event, Amanda's team had already scheduled 2 more workshops, and Michael was beginning to see the potential in this new path. Seeds of change. As the workshops continued, the ripple effect grew. More people reached out to Michael, sharing their stories and asking for advice. Trevor, the young biker, attended one of the sessions, standing nervously in the back of the room. Afterward, he approached Michael and thanked him again. "I didn't think people could change," Trevor admitted, "but you've shown me otherwise." Michael smiled, clapping a hand on Trevor's shoulder. "It's not about whether people can change," he said. "It's about whether they're willing to try." The rising tide. Months passed, and Michael's story continued to spread. The workshops evolved into larger events, and Michael found himself speaking on panels, giving interviews, and even meeting with local leaders to discuss ways to address prejudice and build stronger communities. Through it all, Michael remained grounded. He still worked at the garage, still rode his motorcycle, and still believed in the power of small, everyday acts of kindness. The viral moment at the gas station had been the spark, but it was the steady work that followed. The conversations, the connections, the willingness to listen and learn, that created lasting change. And as Michael stood on the stage at a packed town hall meeting one evening, looking out at the sea of faces, he realized something. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was theirs. It was everyone's. And together, they were rewriting it. The legacy of calm resolve. The transformation of Michael Grayson from a quiet mechanic to a voice for justice and reconciliation was nothing short of remarkable. What had begun as a moment of confrontation at a gas station had blossomed into a movement that touched lives across the country. As months turned into a year, Michael found himself at the heart of a growing network of people committed to bridging divides, fostering understanding, and standing up against prejudice. On a brisk autumn morning, Michael sat in his garage, surrounded by the tools and parts that had defined his life before the gas station incident. Despite his newfound role as a speaker and advocate, he still found solace in the steady rhythm of repairing engines. It reminded him of who he was at his core, a man who fixed things. His phone buzzed on the workbench, pulling him from his thoughts. The name on the screen made him smile. It was Trevor. Text from Trevor. "Hey, Mr. Grayson. Just wanted to let you know I got the job. I'm working at the auto shop downtown. Thanks for helping me get here." Michael leaned back in his chair, the faint scent of oil and metal filling the air. Trevor's journey from a misdirected young man to someone taking meaningful steps forward was one of the victories that meant the most to him. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping changes. It was about the small, steady wins that added up over time. His thoughts were interrupted by another notification. This one was from Amanda Carter, the director of Unity Works. She had sent him a link to a news article titled, "From Confrontation to Inspiration: How Michael Grayson is Changing the Narrative." The article highlighted his work over the past year, his workshops, his speeches, and the countless lives he had impacted. It spoke about Trevor, who had become a regular attendee of the workshops, often sharing his story as a cautionary tale. It mentioned the Iron Eagles, who had embraced their role as advocates for justice, using their reputation to dismantle stereotypes about motorcycle clubs. And it detailed the partnerships Michael had formed with local leaders, law enforcement, and organizations like Unity Works. But what struck Michael the most was the final paragraph. Michael Grayson's story reminds us of an essential truth. That strength is not measured by how loudly we respond to conflict, but by how steadfastly we uphold our principles. In a world so often divided, his calm resolve stands as a beacon of hope, showing us that change begins with the courage to stay true to what is right, even when it's hard. Michael set the phone down, the weight of the words settling over him. It wasn't pride he felt, but gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had supported him, for the chance to make a difference, and for the realization that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward in ways he never imagined. The celebration of change. That evening, the community center was filled to capacity. It was the one-year anniversary of the gas station incident, and Unity Works had organized an event to celebrate the progress that had been made. The room buzzed with energy as people from all walks of life mingled, sharing stories and ideas. Michael stood backstage, his hands resting on the podium he would soon take. Amanda approached, her expression a mix of excitement and pride. "Ready?" she asked. Michael smiled faintly. "As ready as I'll ever be." When he stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. He paused, letting the sound wash over him before raising his hands for silence. The crowd settled quickly, their attention fixed on him. "I never expected to be here," Michael began, his voice steady but reflective. "When I pulled into that gas station a year ago, I was just a guy trying to help someone in need. I didn't know it would lead to this, but what I've learned over the past year is that sometimes the moments we least expect to matter end up changing everything." He spoke about the power of staying calm in the face of adversity, about the importance of standing together as a community, and about the need to see each other as human beings first and foremost. He shared stories of the people he had met, like Trevor, who was now mentoring other young men struggling to find their way, and Rosa, who had started a program to teach self-defense and confidence to young women in the community. "None of this is about me," Michael said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. "It's about us. It's about what we can do when we choose understanding over judgment, action over apathy, and courage over fear." A new challenge. As the event concluded, Michael found himself surrounded by well-wishers. People thanked him, shook his hand, and shared their own stories of transformation. But amidst the positivity, he couldn't ignore a quiet thought lingering in the back of his mind. There was still so much work to be done. Later that night, as he sat alone on his porch, he thought about the challenges that remained. Prejudice wasn't going to disappear overnight. There were still people who refused to change, who clung to hatred and ignorance. But for every one of them, there were dozens more who were willing to listen, to learn, and to grow. Michael knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he wasn't walking it alone. He had the Iron Eagles, his community, and countless others who believed in the same vision. A world where understanding triumphed over division. The ride continues. The next morning, Michael mounted his motorcycle and started the engine. The hum was steady, familiar, a reminder of where he had come from and where he was going. As he rode down the highway, the sun rising behind him, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had ever known. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need to. Change wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about taking the next step, and then the one after that. And so Michael rode on, not as a man defined by a single moment, but as someone who had chosen to make every moment count. The journey's end and a new beginning. The highway stretched endlessly before Michael, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the horizon. The rumble of his motorcycle beneath him felt like a heartbeat, steady and grounding. The wind whipped past, carrying with it the scent of fresh earth and distant pine. For Michael, riding had always been more than just transportation. It was freedom, a chance to think, to process, and to simply be. But today, his mind wasn't on the open road. It was on the faces he'd seen the night before. Trevor's shy grin as he shared his progress, Amanda's confident smile as she laid out plans for the next phase of their initiative, and the countless others who had thanked him for being a voice of reason and resilience in a chaotic world. Their stories had become a part of his own, woven together in a tapestry of change and hope. A detour with purpose. As he rode, a small sign caught his eye. Community Outreach Fair, today only. The arrow pointed to a nearby park, and without thinking, Michael veered off the highway and followed it. When he arrived, he was greeted by the sight of tents and booths lined up under the shade of oak trees. People bustled about, chatting, laughing, and exchanging ideas. Michael parked his bike and walked through the fair. It was a vibrant mix of cultures and causes. Tables promoting literacy programs, food banks, youth mentorship initiatives, and more. The energy was contagious, and Michael found himself drawn to a booth manned by a familiar face, Trevor. Trevor's booth was simple but impactful. A banner read, "Building Bridges, Conversations for Change." He was handing out flyers and talking to a small group about the importance of dialogue and overcoming prejudice. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Michael couldn't help but smile as he watched. When Trevor noticed Michael, his face lit up. "Mr. Grayson," he called, waving him over. Michael approached, his hands in his jacket pockets. "Trevor, looks like you're making waves." Trevor grinned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just trying to pay it forward. You know, you said something once that stuck with me. Every small step counts. So I figured this could be my step." Michael nodded, pride swelling in his chest. "You're doing good work, Trevor. Keep it up." Trevor hesitated for a moment, then added, "You know, I wouldn't have done any of this if it weren't for you. I thought people couldn't change, but you proved me wrong." Michael placed a hand on Trevor's shoulder. "You proved yourself wrong, Trevor. I just gave you the chance." The ripple grows. As Michael walked through the fair, he saw other signs of the impact his story had created. A group of teenagers was painting a mural on a large canvas, depicting scenes of unity and cooperation. Nearby, a circle of people sat in folding chairs, engaged in a facilitated discussion about confronting bias in their own lives. He stopped to listen, blending into the background as a young woman shared her experience of unlearning prejudices she had been taught as a child. Her voice trembled with emotion, but her words were clear and powerful. Michael felt a surge of hope. These conversations were hard, but they were necessary, and they were happening. The call that changed everything. As the fair began to wind down, Michael's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message or notification. It was a call from Ethan. "Hey, big brother," Michael answered, leaning against a tree. "Michael," Ethan said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "I've been talking to the club. We've been thinking, maybe it's time for the Iron Eagles to step up in a bigger way." Michael raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well," Ethan continued, "we've always been about loyalty and standing up for what's right. But I think we could do more. You've shown us that. What if we started a community initiative? Something official. Mentorship programs, rides to raise funds for local causes, partnerships with groups like Unity Works. We could use our presence for good." Michael felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. The Iron Eagles had always been a family, but now they were becoming something even greater, a force for positive change. "I think that's a great idea, Ethan," Michael said. "Count me in." The road ahead. Weeks later, the Iron Eagles held their first official community ride, raising funds for a local youth center. Hundreds of bikers from neighboring clubs joined, their leather jackets blending into a sea of solidarity. Michael rode at the front, alongside Ethan, Amanda, and even Captain Bellamy, who had traded his police cruiser for a motorcycle for the day. As they rode through the streets, people lined the sidewalks, cheering and waving. It was a sight that Michael couldn't have imagined a year ago. A community coming together, united not by fear or division, but by hope and a shared vision for a better future. A quiet moment. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael found himself alone on a quiet hill overlooking the city. The events of the past year played through his mind: the gas station confrontation, the viral video, the workshops, the outreach programs, and the countless lives that had been touched along the way. He thought about his parents, who had always taught him to stand firm in his principles, to be strong but kind. He thought about Ethan and the Iron Eagles, who had shown him the power of loyalty and community. And he thought about the many people who had reached out, offering their support and sharing their own stories of transformation. Michael knew the journey wasn't over. Prejudice and injustice still existed, and there would always be challenges to face. But he also knew that change was possible, one step at a time, one conversation at a time. As the stars began to dot the sky, Michael stood and mounted his bike. The engine roared to life, a familiar sound that filled him with resolve. He rode down the hill, the city lights stretching out before him like a map of endless possibilities. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, and Michael Grayson was ready for whatever came next.